Good morning and welcome to an impromptu chip chat. And with me this morning, I have Grant. Say hello, Grant.
Hello.
And we're going to be talking about Google's Stadia announcement. I was hoping to have a couple of other people with me this morning, namely Count and Sully from the Gamecast crew, but unfortunately they're otherwise engaged. So it's just me and Grant, but hopefully we'll keep you guys entertained. And as I say, I want to talk about Stadia. And the first thing I want to talk about is, well, the the hardware that they talked about. And that was an interesting one for me because obviously this is a distributed network as such, and it's not going to have any hardware in your home. All the hardware is going to be set in their data centers. And we're going to have and I think this is almost moot, but we're going to have a 10.7 teraflop GPU. With 56 compute units, HBM2 memory, a custom AMD x86 processor that runs at 2.7 gigahertz, hyper-threaded with AVX2, and 16 gig of total RAM, up to 484 gigabytes, I should say, per second transfer speed. L2 plus L3 cache of 9.5 megabytes. And if that means anything to you, then explain it to me. One, I'm not quite sure how this is all going to work in and of itself. I do know that they said that they got something like 10, well, as I say before, 10 teraflops. But and it's going to be more powerful than both the Xbox One X and the PlayStation Pro put together. But as I say, for me, that seems to be kind of moot because it's in a data center. And I'm not sure how that's going to transfer across over the internet. So, I mean, what do you make of that, Grant?
Well, this is what I was thinking. You see, they give the spec of this system, but it's like, how do people access that? You know, do they get access to that full power? Do they get access to a percentage of it? I mean, I have my doubts that it's, you know, you can throw these numbers around like 10.7 teraflops, it's more powerful than the two consoles combined. Yeah, I mean, but I don't understand how that's the case. But I guess because there's a little bit of grey areas to exactly how people will be able to access that kind of power. I mean, I think in the presentation they said up to, I think was it Doom Eternal said up to 4K 60 frames per second. But
yeah, and they even touted 8K in the future, which...
I have my doubts, you know, because obviously people are restricted by their own internet connection as well. You know, it may well be the case that yes, they have that power coming out of their data center, but I think it's still a little vague exactly how that's going to work. Yeah.
Well, that was interesting to me because there was one thing I was watching this just before we came on again, and there was one thing that Phil Harrison said, and I'll read it in full. He said, "Traditional platforms with traditional platforms, the client and server are connected by unpredictable internet." Yeah. And therefore, the multiplayer experience is limited by the client with the slowest or poorest connection. But with Stadia, that game client and server both remain on Google's network backbone, resulting in predictable low latency, reliable connectivity, and data security, since no traffic gets exposed to the public internet. I don't understand that.
No, that's...
Because surely at some point it has to be exposed to the public internet when it comes down the pipe to your home.
Well, that's what I thought. Your ISP still plays a part in this, doesn't it? Because they
exactly.
You know, they're looking after your connectivity to the internet. I mean, you still need data transfer. So
yeah,
it's like, how is that going to work? It's like that's sort of like unproven, and it's a little bit. I don't personally understand exactly what he means there, and I'm fairly technically well versed in a lot of things, but you know, it's in practice it's going to be interesting to see how that works, let's put it that way.
Yeah, and you know, I've spoken to Jason and other people who've used some of these services. Obviously Nvidia have got a service like this already, Sony have a service like this already.
Yeah.
It's not on the same grand scale that it seems that Google are talking about here. But nevertheless, we have got some examples of how this kind of thing might work. And the reality is that when you actually come to using them, you are limited by the vagaries of your connection. And we know already that people who are watching Netflix or Amazon Prime or any of these streaming services, if you're watching a streaming service, it's great most of the time, but you only need a dip and then you can get buffering or you can get a reduction in quality.
Yeah.
Now, when you're watching say a 4K stream on Netflix, that's not such an issue because, as I say, it can drop the quality to some degree. It can buffer before it starts to play. All these things can work fine. But that's one end point and one start point. You've got a feed coming to you.
Yeah.
When you bring in multiple people all trying to access the same data all at once over different connections and different speeds, then it becomes much more problematical. And I'm not sure what they can do at their data centers to alleviate that.
Yeah, that's the reality, isn't it, of what happens when... It's like when you do technical tests on games. This is why companies do them, because they want to see this variety of data coming in and out. So it's hitting their servers. People are connecting to their servers. But like you say, you've got this massive disparity in connection speeds and all sorts. So it's like, how do they handle that? In practice, these things are usually not as smooth as are presented in this kind of like very glossy conference way that Google did it. I'm not saying that they can't do it that way, but I'm just saying it remains to be seen exactly what factors would interfere with their promise to actually deliver this kind of quality of service.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
And, did you see, well, I know you watched it, so you must have seen it, where the guy was going from the computer to the phone to the TV.
Yeah.
And it was all seamless and stuff. Well, we've seen thousands of these bloody presentations over the years, and they're always set up in optimum situations. And sometimes, like that one didn't even look particularly impressive to me. It didn't really, excuse me, it didn't really set my pants on fire watching it.
No.
It was. I was looking at it, and it looked like a mock-up. Let's be honest. It may not have been, but that's what it looked like to me.
It definitely looked like a mock-up. Yeah, it looked like you say, the optimum possible, sort of staging of that, demonstration of that technology. Because, I mean, according to Google, maybe you can go into this later, but it's the controller, isn't it, that connects to the data center. It's not the controller connecting to each individual device in order to sync.
That was actually interesting. That in effect, your controller is your machine.
Yeah.
It's almost like that's your console.
Yeah. That's right.
I don't want to be too hard on this. I just think that when you talk about things like, 10 teraflops and 2.7 gigahertz and all this stuff, it's kind of meaningless once you put in the internet into that. And trying to kind of use smoke and mirrors to say that this doesn't come into play because we've got these data centers and we've got this reliable connectivity. Well, you're only as good. You still, when you're using networking, you're only as good as your worst connection. And he actually said in the presentation that was the problem with traditional online experiences. With multiplayer games.
Yeah, that's true.
But some wag in one of the comments said something along the lines of, "Oh, so now we're going to get laggy single player games too."
Yeah, as if it's not bad enough that we have to put up with like being sort of equalised with the person with the worst ping. So if you're playing a multiplayer shooter, I don't know how it works in all games, but in something like Battlefield, if someone's got a really high ping, they almost have an advantage because the game is kind of like, the game focuses on that person with the highest ping. So even if you've got a really low ping yourself, you're not at an advantage, you're at a disadvantage, which I think is it's going to be interesting how they solve not only that, but also if they're going to introduce it in single player games because someone might not have a particularly good connection. I think the issue is what sort of connection this is going to require, and I think that's going to be important.
Yeah. And, it probably will scale. You'll probably have a situation like you do with Netflix and all the rest of it, where the quality of the images you're getting will be dependent on your connection. And in some ways, if they can make it so that the quality of the image drops rather than the quality of the connection drops, if you see what I mean.
I think Netflix
so
do that, don't they?
60 frames per say again?
I think don't Netflix do... They have a way... I think they have quite clever technology where instead of buffering, if your connection drops a little bit, they packet the kind of picture data in kind of like smaller chunks, so that it stops as much as possible. Netflix will try and stop your things from buffering. It will only buffer if you completely lose your connection.
Exactly, yeah, and I've experienced this. If you're watching on the Xbox, depends on the platform you're watching on. But I think on the Xbox, if you press the right button, the right thumbstick down, it'll show you the whether you've got 1080p or 4K or 720p or whatever.
Okay.
And you can do that on a keyboard as well. I can't remember what the keyboard command is, but you can do that with a keyboard command as well.
Yeah.
And you can see, usually when a show starts, it'll be like 720p or something, or sometimes even lower,
Yeah.
And then within a few seconds, it's gone up. 720 goes up to 1080, and then, hopefully if it's working properly, it goes up to 4K.
Yeah.
And so you get that. And usually within a few seconds, it's stabilized and you've got a good image. The problem is, obviously, when you're playing video games, there's a lot more going on. And so you need much more bandwidth.
Yeah.
I'm quite prepared to accept from Google, though, that some of this can be alleviated by doing it all in one place and then pumping it out to everybody at once.
Yes, in theory.
So maybe, in theory, maybe that is possible.
Yeah.
I always take some of this stuff with a pinch of salt because, as I said before, we've seen countless times when people have made these claims about what they can achieve. And the reality is often falling far short of what was claimed. So I'm prepared to accept that it might happen. But, when they say things like, rather than having hundreds of players in a battle royale, you can have thousands of players in a battle royale. Well, every time you add a player to the setup, you're adding complication. You're adding another connection.
Yeah, you've got tracks, clients. I mean, they say that client and server, they take control of that. I think, isn't it on traditional multiplayer games, you're sending data from your side and you're receiving it from the client side. I can't remember which way around it is, but
yeah, I'm not sure either.
But in theory, I think it's a great idea. I think what they've got here could be phenomenally good, but we've seen it, like you said, we've seen it being promised before. I mean, look at OnLive, if you remember that.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair to them, some of their technology ends up being bought by Sony via Gaikai or whatever they were called, for PlayStation Now. So, the actual technology behind it is sound, but it's limited by the realities of the internet, as we well know. And I think what Google are promising is great, and if it works reasonably well, it could get a good foothold. But I'm just not sure in practice how it's going to work, and that's the interesting part of it, I think.
No, and this idea of distributed physics and the idea that you can actually have more going on at the server, so you can actually have in some respects better games with better graphics and more people playing. It sounds great, and I want to believe it.
Yeah,
but wanting to believe it isn't the same as being shown it working.
Exactly.
And when they talk about things like they showed Doom Eternal, and then they said Doom Eternal was running on a single GPU, and then they showed a demo and said this is what we can do with multiple GPUs, and they showed, and it did when they showed that split screen of one GPU versus two GPUs, looked fantastic.
Yeah.
The water effects were so much better on the multi-GPU, which you would expect. But it always comes back to that, well, that's in a perfect scenario. Yeah. What's it like in the real world? And we'll only find that out once it launches.
Yeah, they said something about, is it Google's technology using the same as the Vulkan API, which was used in the first game. I mean, the thing with Doom is, Doom 2016, is it runs really well on pretty low NPCs. It's one of those games that's incredibly well coded. So to a certain extent, I can imagine it will run well via Google's hardware platform, via Stadia. But of course, we know that single GPUs, multiple GPUs aren't the only element. I'm sure. and the demonstration show, like you said, looked great. You could see a real difference between the two. But what happens when somebody's sitting down, they're playing Doom Eternal via Stadia, and their little brother's downloading something in the other room or hogging some of the bandwidth? Are they still going to get this sort of 4K 60 frames per second Doom experience?
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And let's take it to its kind of extreme case, if you like. The reality is they can make all these claims about it's going to work better because they've got all this stuff going on their server.
Yep.
But when your network goes down, when your ISP goes down, the reality is you ain't playing a game.
Yeah. I mean, you're playing any game nowadays.
Okay, you can maybe say again, sorry?
You're not playing any game nowadays. Pretty much every game has an online element now, even single player ones.
Exactly. Yeah. And okay, maybe with 5G coming along, you could move over to your phone. And I said this, I think I said this on Discord, that I see a future where we have, like landline phones have gone the way of the dodo. I think that your internet service provider is going to go.
Yeah.
In the long term, we're not going to have a cable into our house. What we'll have 5G and whatever comes after that.
Yeah, that's likely. Yeah.
Yeah. And so in the long term, this idea of having a wired internet is going to be gone, and we'll have a very robust and very fast, in effect, phone network, 5G, whatever. At which point, the ability to move from one machine to another becomes so much easier and so much more simple, and everything can be integrated perfectly because everything's on the same network. And that's great and all, but that's the future. That's not now.
No. I mean, yeah, their controller as well. I was interested in that aspect of, they said that it works via Wi-Fi, the connection. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because my issue with Wi-Fi is latency and interference, because it's a big deal. I mean, I personally don't use Wi-Fi because my house is not set up properly for it, so I have to use TP-Link plugs for Ethernet.
I use them a lot as well.
And I mean, obviously, their controller works in a slightly different way. It's making the connection to Stadia, but again, I'm not sure the practicalities of that. I understand why they're doing it that way, because it reduces the latency that something like Bluetooth would have. But it's still, you've still got issues with Wi-Fi connectivity.
It makes sense, but when, for instance, you talk about having network connectivity issues. My lad's, we've got a spare room that we kind of use when we haven't got people staying. He uses it as a playroom, and he's got an Xbox in there. And that place, even though it's almost directly above where we've got the internet coming in and the router, even though it's directly above that, the internet connection to that room is like a dead zone. Trying to get internet into that room is a nightmare, and I've tried all sorts. And so if you were sat in there using this controller, it wouldn't work. It just wouldn't work. It would be awful. He'd be shouting down to me all the time, Dad, can you come and sort this out? And I'd be like, no, I can't, because this is not down to me. This is down to Google.
And this is a reality that people are facing, because the reality of their lives and their home setups and things like these are all elements that will come into play, because if you've got like walls that are too thick, then Wi-Fi just will not permeate through. It just won't. It's like you say, you will have these dead zone spots around your house, and that will be a real issue. You will have a piece of hardware that you cannot access, and you might be paying, I don't know, the same as you pay for a Netflix sub or more per month to access it. And it's so connection dependent, it can become, well, the case that you're paying for something that you're not getting much of a benefit from at certain points, So there's a lot that comes into play when the reality of the hardware hits the general public,
Well, and you kind of, when you say general public there, you've hit on something that struck me about this, and I think this is something that we've touched on. I think we even touched on it last week when we were talking about the future of gaming. And I actually looked at what Sundar Pichai, I want to call him Pikachu for some reason.
The Google CEO.
Yeah. When he first came on, his opening statement was, I'm not a big gamer, but I play FIFA a lot. It's so immersive.
I didn't see the beginning of that. I didn't hear that.
And I looked at that, and then I looked at what they were talking about later on when Phil Harrison was talking about instant access, and then he was talking about how movies and music had gone over from being like a piece of, a disc or whatever that you put in and play.
Yeah.
And how it becomes so much more convenient when you've got it coming to you, sort of down the pipe, as it were. So now we've got things like Netflix, and we've got various music apps that we get our music. And most people don't buy CDs anymore, and they don't buy DVDs or Blu-rays anymore. Most people get it digitally.
Yeah.
But the reality there is that when we first started moving from CD over to digital distribution, we were getting MP3 and basically compromised quality.
Yeah.
And we're still getting compromised quality. Now we've moved over to streaming primarily rather than downloads. And the quality again has dropped.
Yeah.
But people don't care.
No, because they've just got used to it, haven't they?
Exactly. The mainstream of people do not care. Look, most people go out and they'll spend 100 quid, 200 quid maybe on a little mini system that they stick in the corner of the room, and they stick one speaker behind the sofa and one speaker up on a shelf, and then they go listen to the great stereo, and there is no stereo because they're all,
Yeah.
Even if the thing was capable of producing stereo, you can't produce stereo if the speakers are in the wrong place. My hi-fi
No, I'm with you.
interest is starting to come out here. But so the quality dropped. Same thing with Netflix. Netflix is great. Amazon Prime is okay. Some of the shows are good. But in terms of the actual raw quality, if you compare the raw quality of a Blu-ray against the raw quality of Netflix or Amazon or any of the other streaming services, more are available, then the raw quality is not as good.
No.
But the convenience is there, and people will take convenience over quality any time. So my next question to you is, do you think most people will care if it's a little bit laggy?
I think to an extent they probably won't. My guess is, you've got the head of Google saying he thinks FIFA's immersive. I actually think that's a sad kind of indictment of sort of where mainstream gaming is at. Most people will buy FIFA and COD each year. So say, for instance, you could translate those experiences into Stadia. With COD, a lot of people are playing the multiplayer, same with FIFA. So, yes, they might care if it's laggy enough to affect their multiplayer experience. But if, for instance, there's a lot of people that are going to be playing single-player games. If you're talking about a little bit of lag, like an intermittent basis, then I don't think they're going to be that bothered. Because you might see a couple of frame drops or something on the screen while you're playing. But I think it's dependent on how well the technology copes with variations in internet speeds, for instance, because of the reality of your own ISP providing you with that service. And we know that ISPs, especially in the UK, because of contention ratios, because of a lot of people accessing the internet, say at night, when they get home from work, the reality is they're doing compression on their end in order to make sure that the speeds don't look like they're dropping, but they are in reality, because it's
kind of like the network equivalent of when everyone comes and puts the kettle on and the lights dim.
Because you get that surge when everyone wants to use Netflix at like 8 o'clock or something, on a weeknight. Exactly. So it'd be interesting to see how much lag in reality is generated because of these issues which are out of control of Google's hands. As much as they want to say, we've got a lot of these things sorted by removing this element and that element, there's still things that they don't have any control over.
I agree, and it really does smack of smoke and mirrors. It feels like they're trying to pull the wool over people's eyes, and the thing that got me is they're trying to pull the wool over people's eyes in that audience. Those guys are developers; they know this stuff.
Yeah.
But the reality is that those guys are going to buy into it if they can see that there's a platform that they can sell their games on. Developers want to sell their games, so
yeah, they do.
I don't see that Google will have a problem getting third-party developers on board as long as they provide a good enough service.
I think they.
And let's be honest,
I think they already have, haven't they? I think they've already convinced quite a few big developers. They just haven't. And I mean, Ubisoft allowed their game to be demoed, didn't they, through the beta, through Assassin's Creed Odyssey? I mean, you can't. And they're one of the biggest software companies in the world. If you sign up Ubisoft, then that's great because that looks good. And it looks good for gamers because they
and id as well. They got id on there, like you said.
You got id,
like
and that means by default they have Bethesda then because it is owned by Bethesda. So, it's interesting.
I also think though that I'm not a big gamer, but I play FIFA a lot. Wasn't, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I don't think it was something that he just threw out there without thinking about. I think that told us exactly what they're looking for. They're looking for the mainstream.
Oh yeah, they are.
And let's be honest here, that's what Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo, Google, whoever else it might be trying to get into these markets or, making, consolidating themselves in the market. Whatever they're trying to do, they want to appeal to the mass market. If you look at all the commentators, there's been a lot of commentators already, and I wanted to sit on this story for a day or so just to let it percolate a little bit, watch it a couple of times, get some ideas going in my head, because it's very easy to have a knee-jerk reaction to things like this.
Yeah, true.
But and I saw a lot of commentators going on about this, and some people are saying, oh, it's going to completely fail. It doesn't stand a chance against Microsoft and Sony, and I'm afraid I don't agree with that. I think if anyone can make this work, then Google can, because they've got the power in terms of money, they've got the infrastructure, they've got everything in place that they need to. The biggest downside for them is that, it's Google, and we all know where Google, go with things.
Yeah.
But, all these people commentating, they're missing the point for me.
Yeah, they are.
And I think they've done this continually with Microsoft as well. They're missing the point. They get their panties in a pickle about this stuff, and it's not going to be, for us, and we're not going to be able to play these games. It's not, I'm not interested in this, blah blah blah, and getting all up in arms. And the reality is, they don't care about you.
No, that's exactly what I was going to say. That I read some comments from people saying, "Oh, I'm quite happy with my Xbox or my PS4 or my collection of games," and I think they don't. They're not interested in you. They're not going after hardcore gaming enthusiasts because they don't matter in this ecosystem. Because Google Google have looked at things like mobile gaming and thinking, we want a slice of that because mobile gaming is the lowest common denominator gaming. No offense to people who play mobile games, but it is. That's how it's designed.
No, you're right, exactly.
And they want to make gaming so accessible that it's simple and people won't will have few objections to it. And if that works in reality, then great. And they have the resources to do it, and they are very serious about this. You can tell. They're putting a lot of resources into this, and some very smart people at Google. So I have no doubts that they believe they can do it. It's whether it's going to happen is another thing entirely.
Well, it's hard to establish yourself in the market. I mean, you look at Microsoft, and even if you discount their missteps over the last few years with, from 2013 with the announcement of the Xbox One, even if they'd got that right at that point, the reality is that Microsoft are not considered gaming royalty in the same way that Nintendo and Sony are.
Not quite,
and it takes a lot of years to establish yourself.
No, it does. I mean, that's partly, they got themselves to blame for that because of issues they had with the 360. But if you look at the trajectory, the 360 had this massive lead. Sony caught them up with the PS3, and towards the end it was like neck and neck. So Sony had all this momentum going into the next generation that they carried on. And like you said, I think even if Microsoft hadn't stood up and did one of the worst presentations of a new console in the history of anything ever, then
it's awful.
Then I still think Sony would have beaten them in terms of sales. But the thing is with Microsoft now, they want to change the narrative, and this is what Google are doing. They want to sort of change people's perceptions of what gaming can be, and I think that's where the interesting sort of developments will lie. Whether whether the mainstream gamers will follow that idea. And if the mainstream gamers follow that idea, kind of everyone else has to. It's like you said with MP3s. We didn't like it at first. I remember buying an MP3 player. It was like a 1 gigabyte one in 2000 for like £200 or something. Because I was interested in new technology. And I'm thinking, this doesn't sound even near as good as my stereo, because I had a proper stereo set up, that cost like a lot of money. But it's the convenience again, isn't it? It's the convenience factor. And that is a massive factor in people's decisions as to whether they adopt something or not. It's not the only one. It's just a big one.
Exactly, yeah. And I actually see gaming, and I think I said this to you on Discord a couple of times, I see gaming going the same way as music and video and all that. You've got your audio files, you've got your video files. They spend an awful lot of money on their hardware, and they sit in their, in some cases, dedicated rooms with their chair that looks like it's come off Mastermind, and they have their £500 to £1,000 headphones, and they spend thousands of pounds on cables that more on cables than I spend on my entire system, and they sit there and they smoke their pipe and they sit there with their slippers and they wax lyrical about the timpani in this particular track and all the rest of it. But they are not the mainstream. They're a small number. And I hate to say it, but we're those guys in gaming.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I can see the gaming industry is going to fragment in the same way as the music industry did. You've got more and more and more. You're going to have growth. It's going to become bigger and bigger. It's going to sell more and more. But the guys in the corner churning away will be the guys who were the ones who supported the industry at the beginning and through the various stages up until it hit the mainstream. It happens all the time with any new medium.
It does, and any industry needs visionaries. It needs people to sort of come along and say, well, how about looking at it from this perspective, and could we take this industry in this direction, and sometimes it's not always the first person to do that. So if you look at people like OnLive, were way ahead of the time. People weren't ready for it. Google might have positioned themselves at the right time. A lot of it's timing. It's getting it so people are ready to accept what you're selling. If they're in a position where they think, okay, yeah, I know I can buy into this. If it works in a half decent way, and you get a bit of momentum in terms of sales and adoption, and if they chuck it out to streamers and streamers get on board. I mean, look at the integrated elements that they were trying to sell.
Well, that's
that's
actually
big element.
Exciting.
Yeah, it is.
And if you look at a generational thing, I'm a miserable old git. I like to sit in a room on my own and play video games on my own. And sometimes I don't even want to play online. I just want to play a good story-based game on my own. But that's not where my kid is. My kid isn't interested in story-based games, and a lot of kids his age aren't. And they may change as they get older. And I think we've had this conversation with Sully where as you get older, your tastes change to some extent because they have to, because you can't play Twitch shooters when your reactions are shot.
No, you can't. I'm
that's the
living
reality
proof
of
of that, yeah.
yeah, you and me both. But my kid will sit there and he will watch YouTube, and he will watch a YouTuber, and then he'll go and play the game that the YouTuber was playing.
Yeah.
Now, this breaking down of barriers where you can press a button on your iPad and load up that game that guy's playing, and not just load up that game that guy's playing, but go into the lobby where he's playing. And again, it's all very well saying that, but if you're trying to get into a lobby with Dan TDM or someone like that, good luck getting in there.
Yeah.
So the reality, again, is probably not as rosy as the picture they try to paint. But nevertheless, that breaking down of barriers, especially for the younger kids who like that, the ability to do things straight away, snappily, and go in and play with their friends and all the rest of it, watch a video, go in and play that game, that's exciting. And if they can pull that off, then great,
That is exciting. But also there's that element where... But they also demonstrated the fact that if it was a single-player game, you could jump into the point where the streamer was at in that single-player game as well, which I have sort of mixed feelings about, because we already have an issue where single-player games are selling less and less, partly because people are streaming them. But if you've got people streaming them and you've also got the ability to jump in and just sort of join the game at that point, great. I can see why you'd want to do that if you've been watching somebody stream like a let's play, and you think, well, I've watched all this, I don't need to play it, but then I can jump in and play this bit of it. It's like, well, what does that do to the development of single player games?
That's a really good point.
It's like,
yeah,
are we going to see these serialized single player games because people are playing them in chunks? I wonder how it will affect future development of, these types of games, because it's obviously going to. It's funny,
actually. Maybe it will push episodic content. I know Phil Spencer's already talked about, he sees episodic content as being something that happens more, and I've had a problem with episodic content when you're buying it.
Yeah.
It's not such an issue when you're paying for a service and that episodic content drops when it drops.
Yeah, that's different.
Because you're not paying an upfront fee for it in a sense.
Yeah.
So episodic content becomes much more viable for me anyway in that circumstance. And it also becomes, from what you've just been saying, it also becomes almost more inevitable that you need to move towards that model.
I think it is. I mean, I think when if you look at Hitman, the first Hitman was released episodically, and it didn't sell very well because not only were people not ready for it because they tried to sell it via a traditional model or in the traditional sort of gaming model space. So you had like each episode was like, I don't know, $14.99. So it's not particularly good value if you're just going to buy each individual episode, because once you bought them all, you're paying more than you would for a traditional game anyway. But also, it doesn't fit as well as, as a streaming model where you could jump into the game at any point. That kind of makes more sense. But people weren't ready for that style of episodic content. I mean, it obviously didn't work that well for Telltale because initially people were buying into it, but their profits tailed off massively, and they used to release all their games episodically. But most people would wait for the full season because they were getting, like you said, they were getting better value. And it's different. It's not like a Netflix model, but Netflix tend to release the whole series up front, though, don't they?
They do,
and that's very different. So, I think if you're going to sell episodic content in a traditional sort of model of gaming sales, then it's not going to work. But in this context, it's a very different idea and concept, and people might be more willing to buy into it.
I absolutely agree with that. And I actually, I think we talked about it at the time as well, but I actually made a video about the first reboot, if you like, of Hitman.
Yeah.
And I was not convinced by that episodic model. And I actually made the point that if you're, say, for instance, going and buying it up front, or in what, there was the case where you could buy the excuse me, my voice is going. You could buy the collector's edition.
Yeah.
And if you bought the collector's edition, it was over £100 and you got a statue or whatever. And you got the first episode. Well, it's like you spend £100 and you get the first episode, and then, okay, fine, with Hitman, all the episodes came out. But what happens if a Telltale kind of situation occurs?
Well, it did. It kind of did, didn't it? With because
exactly,
IO Interactive basically were split off from, is it Square Enix that were publishing it?
Yeah.
So they obviously looked at the sales and said, well, we can't justify this, or this experiment has failed. I don't know exactly what. I mean, IO are publishing on their own now, which is great because it's like Bungie are doing something similar. But it's people obviously weren't prepared to buy into that model. But then they could have. It's like they're saying they could have looked at what was happening with Telltale and thought, well, generally, maybe this episodic idea only fits certain types of games. If a game has a cliffhanger, like a series, I can understand it. But Hitman didn't, did it? It was just like a series of like encapsulated locations that you play. So it's
having said that, though, I actually think if you look at that episodic approach of Hitman, going back to what we were saying about this maybe working on a platform like this, I think this could work brilliantly well with something like Stadia.
Oh yeah, it could.
The idea that you can watch somebody playing through a Hitman map or whatever, one of the levels, and then you can click a button and go in, and then you could maybe play it slightly differently to how they played it, or try a different way of killing the antagonist or whatever. Something like that. That actually, when you look at it like that's quite an exciting idea. And this way of distribution, this way of playing games, does open up potential. And I agree with Google on this one. It does open up a potential way of producing games that is different and something we've not seen before. I think it can lead to some creativity, and it could lead to games we've not even thought of before.
Yeah. The style of games being developed will change if this model becomes popular, most definitely, because it's an inevitable consequence of, like you say, the way people play these types of games will change, and the way that they're developed will change as a result, because there will be it won't be a case of you sitting there and playing through a single player game. Hopefully that will still carry on to a certain extent, because
I hope so,
because if it disappears completely, I might take up something other hobby, but
I'll be playing retro games for the rest of my life.
Yeah, it'll be like Space Invaders. Here you go. But you've also got things like the Google Assistant, where if you were stuck in a game, you could just automatically bring up a video. I mean, that idea, because obviously what they said was true. If you're stuck in a game, you want to find out how to progress, you have to stop the game, go into YouTube, find a video, and they want to kind of take all the steps out of that process as well and make it more sort of like instantly available via the controller. So another way to sell an aspect of their controller, but it's clever. I think it's a feature that people will find very useful, because a lot of people, I mean, even though I think games are quite a bit easier than they used to be, a lot of people still get quite stuck on even the simplest puzzles, which surprises me.
It'd be good if it gets. I know we've seen Cuphead come into the Switch.
Yeah,
but it'd be good if it comes to Stadia and you'll go into the, you'll press the button to find a video telling you how to solve this particular level in Cuphead. And you'll press on it, and it'll come up, and it'll say, "Don't even bother."
No, it'll say you need better reactions.
It's too hard,
old man, or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because I can't even get past the first fucking level on that game. Excuse my language.
Oh man, Cuphead is so hard. It is so. I love the music, I love the design style and everything, but it drives me insane.
Yeah, it is.
I've got a little bit further than you, so I'm much more hardcore than you.
The thing is, though, I can nearly complete. I mean, I've nearly virtually completed Bloodborne, so I can play hard games, but it's just Cuphead seems to be a different level entirely.
Oh, it's insane. It is mental.
Yeah.
But it's kind of addictive as well. And it's one of those games, when you're playing it, you keep wanting to play and play and play. But I had to kind of walk away because I was getting kind of agitated and annoyed with it.
I can believe that. Yeah.
Yeah. But so anyway, look, we've covered, I think, most of the stuff relating to the technical aspects of the game of the service, and possible pros and cons of it.
Yeah.
But one thing that stuck with me when this was going on, I was watching it, and they said a couple of things actually that stuck with me. One was they're releasing it this year, and they're starting a game studio. But
yeah,
this year. And, we said this beforehand, that Microsoft were kind of criticised because they bought all these game studios, and people are saying, oh, well, these games won't be available this year or next year. It's going to be a few years down the line. And that's fine. That's true.
Yeah.
That's fair enough. But if you're going to apply that to Microsoft, then look at Google. And Google are saying now that they're releasing this year, and we've just started to work on games. Or we've just started to assemble a studio, for crying out loud.
Is that what they said? Did they say they literally just started the studio? Or
Yeah, I think, I'm trying to remember what the exact words were.
Yeah.
But the way I read it, anyway, was that they weren't very far along.
No, I think you're probably right. I think judging by what they said, that's more than likely the case, that they've got this studio, like you say, assembled. And we know that means, okay, so in traditional terms, that means 2 to 3 years before we see anything coming out of that studio. But yeah, they said they're releasing this year to US, UK, Canada, and most of Europe, but we still don't have any idea on pricing, do we? At all? No.
Well, that was the other thing I was going to say. We've got no first party games.
Yeah.
Certainly not coming out this year. If we see any first party from Google this year, I'll eat my own foot on YouTube. Please don't produce any games now, YouTube, Google.
I think you'd be safe.
I don't really want to eat my own foot.
Yeah.
So we've got no first-party games. They showed a list of partners, but we're not sure what third-party games we're going to be getting. And we've no idea how much this is going to cost. And I would suspect, I'm guessing, but I would suspect the pricing will be tiered.
Yeah.
So, a bit like Netflix, where you can get more devices and better quality if you pay more.
Yeah, I mean, because they talked about needing Chromecast as well, didn't they? Or, well, not needing it, but you could use it. And I'm just wondering,
you're going to use it on your telly.
Yeah, I'm just wondering what, whether they will give you discount for buying multiples of those, or I don't know. I think you're right in the sense that tiered is most likely, but I'm just wondering if they'll go for a similar pricing model to Microsoft's Game Pass or not, or offer discounts to get people to sign up to the service.
Well, I would suspect, and certainly if this were me doing it, I suspect they will come in hard on pricing.
Yeah, they have to, won't they?
Yeah, because they're going to want to attract people to the service fast.
Yeah.
So they've obviously got Ubisoft on board. They've got other partners. I need to have a look at that graphic they put up of how many different partners. Obviously id, which means Bethesda's probably on board as well.
Yeah.
As you said earlier,
because there was these they put these displays before their GDC conference. They put these like these. I don't know. They were like displaying these like symbols around GDC, which sort of hinted at these different games. And one of them showed this picture of this arrow going through this knee, which suggested Skyrim was one of the games. Because it's the old it's the old meme, isn't it?
I was playing Skyrim on my toaster the other day.
I used to be an adventurer and I got an arrow through the knee, and it's like that famous. Yes, Skyrim. It's like you say, Bethesda are obviously on board. And they've hinted that they are. So we could expect Skyrim, because like you say, it's on every, you can get it on people's fridges and toasters now. So in fact, Bethesda joked about that, didn't they, in one of their presentations, that someone was playing it through Amazon Echo or something.
Yeah.
But I think they're going to launch with a number of existing devs games. I mean, you know that Doom's coming. It'd be interesting to see what else is coming, but I agree. I think they need to be aggressive on pricing, because they need to entice people on the idea, and you have to make it attractive enough for the general gaming public or the FIFA enthusiast to think, "Oh, this is worth trying. Yeah, this is quite cheap." And they want to adopt probably the Amazon model, get big quickly. And worry about the bottom line later. Yeah.
Suck people in, get them paying, and then you can increase your prices down the line when people are bought into the platform, and it's all integrated into their systems and they're pretty much tied into it.
Yeah.
Then you can start thinking about increasing your prices.
Yeah, I mean they've got AMD on board as well with the hardware, haven't they? So they've got
yeah, exactly. I mean, all the stuff about the hardware. I mean, we went through that earlier. For me, that was. They can put any hardware they like in their data centers. It makes very little difference as long as the end result is good for the user.
Yeah.
Most people couldn't give a toss about that stuff. And the people that do give a toss about that stuff are going to be the people moaning about this.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the general public are thinking, I don't care how many teraflops it's got. Does it work properly?
Yeah, exactly. They couldn't give a toss, frankly. And why would they?
No.
Why would most people, unless you're an enthusiast, and I like hardware and stuff like this, but unless you're an enthusiast, why would you care?
No.
Nobody cares what bloody CPU's in their bloody television. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, unless you're trying to show off against other enthusiasts, where you say, "Oh, my PC's got this spec." It doesn't really matter, does it? At the end of the day,
it doesn't. It doesn't.
We just want to play games.
Yeah, exactly. And let's be honest, we don't know yet.
No,
we don't know. I think whether they've been forced to go early with this or whether this was always the plan, I don't know. But I do suspect that Microsoft are going to come with their Project X Cloud, whatever it's going to be called in the end. I think they've already hinted. We talked about this before we recorded.
Yeah.
They've already hinted that they're going to be dropping that probably at E3. So I think Google needed to get out the gates.
Oh, they did, and I'll be interested to see how Microsoft respond. I think their E3 presentation will be very interesting. I wonder how much of it will change and evolve based on what Google have presented, because
Yeah.
if that sort of leaked internal memo is anything to go by, then I think Microsoft are not shaken, but they're kind of, it's kind of sort of thrown something into the mix, which has made them sort of maybe think about their strategy a little bit more.
Well, Google have definitely thrown a spanner in the works, however you look at this.
Yeah, I mean, they probably have, but because Microsoft might have already had set plans, and now they're having to adapt a little bit more in order to sort of change or convince people, because they've got a competing platform now. Competing cloud platform was before. They probably thought, well, I mean, they must have known Google had something in the works, but they just didn't know what, did they? That was the thing.
No, I would be surprised if they didn't have some idea of what was coming. I mean, we had the demo last year, so they knew something was coming.
Oh, yeah, sorry, you're right. To that extent, they probably did.
So we definitely knew that Google were doing something. We just didn't know the extent of it. But it was a fair bet that they were going to be coming out with something along these lines. A lot of us thought that they were going to be announcing a console. I mean, I thought it would be a streaming console, and all the rest of the stuff that they've talked about I thought would be the case as well, but I thought maybe they'd have some hardware.
Yeah.
Seems like they're not going with the hardware at all. They'll just, doing an end run round the hardware and just going straight to the service.
And they've got their controller, which most people have seen to comment that it's like a combination of the Xbox One S controller with like DualShock thumb control, sort of like sticks as well. So they know what works when it comes to gaming, because they've obviously done a lot of analysis of the gaming market, because they would have had to, to position to get themselves ready to present what they're presenting. So I think in a lot of ways it's an interesting time where, if we put aside whether it will work or not in practice, I think the fact that Google have entered this market and obviously have a lot invested in it is going to shake things up. And, next generation will be interesting, because we'll have this clash between traditional hardware in PS5 and Xbox and cloud gaming.
Yep, exactly. And it could almost, for me, be the biggest entry into the gaming market since Microsoft came into it.
Yeah, also Sony with the PlayStation, the original PlayStation.
Or Sony with the PlayStation, exactly, yeah. Those two were, massive shake-ups, and I think this could, and the jury's still out on it at the moment, but this could be as big as that.
Yeah, it could be, and it has the potential to be. At the moment, I mean, I was initially enthusiastic about it, but I'm sort of on the fence because I want to see what happens. But it's exciting, if anything else, because it's something new and it's something unproven, and it'd be interesting to see how, the mass market reacts to it.
Yeah,
because that'll be key. Whether they can convince people that this idea the timing is right. Because as we said, a lot of it is timing. If you get it right,
timing, the way they market it.
Yeah. Exactly.
But Google, one thing they are quite good at is marketing, apart from that bloody YouTube video they put out every year. Christ on a bike. I don't know what the hell that's supposed to be.
Oh my God. I just think, it's like a self-congratulatory thing, isn't it, that they do?
Well, people talk about video games making people violent. Fuck video games. That made me want to kill people. It was awful.
Yeah, I mean, let's face it, we already use a lot of Google products. We use their phones, we use their browsers, etc. So it's not as if they don't have a proven track record in convincing people to use their products, because
exactly
they do.
Exactly. Yeah.
So this is why I think this could do really well. It could just build a niche, or people could look at it and go, "Nah, don't want that." But
I think knowing Google, if it becomes a niche, they'll can it.
Yeah, like Google Plus, you mean?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and if you're talking Google Plus, Google have got a track record of getting people to buy their products, but they've also got a track record of fucking things up in a big way.
They do as well, yeah, and that needs to be said.
They tried to make their own kind of Facebook, if you like, with Google Plus, and cocked it up royally.
That's because it was ridiculously difficult to use. It was stupid.
Oh, Jesus Christ. And this is the problem, it's just like, if this comes along and all these great ideas that they've presented turn out to be really clunky and difficult to use, and when you press the button to join the stream, or you press the button to view the video or whatever, you're sitting with buffer face for the next 10 minutes or whatever. If the reality turns out to be nothing like the kind of utopian world that they've presented, And let's be honest, it's going to be somewhere in the middle,
Yeah.
likely to be somewhere in the middle. But if it turns out to be the dystopian side of it and it all falls apart and is horrible, then YouTube will ditch it.
Oh yeah, they will. Yeah, definitely.
But my worry is though that this is going to impact YouTube as well. And we talked about this to some extent beforehand.
Yeah.
And I see YouTube almost being subsumed by this idea if it takes off.
Well, they're going to change YouTube to incorporate this. I mean, so at the very least, there's going to be, YouTube is going to evolve from the way we know it now. But YouTube has existing issues that Google need to sort out first and foremost,
which they seem to have no intention of sorting.
Yeah,
and this is the worry for me is they don't sort. It's like Epic Games with Fortnite.
Yeah,
they keep coming out with these new ideas and new things, but these don't sort out the existing issues. And this is Google all over. YouTube is a mess at the moment, and their over-reliance on algorithms. When, to anyone paying attention, these algorithms aren't fit for purpose, unless you buy into the conspiracy theory that Google are actually trying to push out the small guys and they only want to be a mainstream player. And little guys making videos about, how to get their Xbox working or how to build a shed or anything, are not they're not interested in those guys at all. If you think that, then maybe the algorithms are working.
Yeah. Yeah.
But whatever else, this is going to push them more in that direction, not less.
I think
more towards the big YouTubers, more towards people who are doing, big streams and people like Ninja and people like that.
Yeah.
They're going to go from strength to strength. This stuff's going to be, they're not going to put a fucking link into me.
No.
If I'm doing streaming on YouTube, they're not going to put a bloody button on for people to link to me, are they? Well, maybe they will. But really, is that who they're interested in? I don't think it is.
Well,
so this thing of killing off the small YouTuber is, for me, this actually could be something that, is the final nail almost to that.
It could well be. I think the problem with their algorithm is it's more geared towards the viewer than the creator, because it's more interested in interpreting what the viewer might want to see next. But the only problem with that is I think it's heavily weighted towards sort of like videos with pre-existing views, so new content struggles a bit to get noticed. Because you've got we had a situation a few years ago where YouTube used to be more egalitarian, so anyone could get a recommended video, and I swear that aspect has been changed. I mean, I used to have a career trying to interpret Google search engines, so to a certain extent, I kind of have an idea how they think and how they adapt in order to incorporate what they think people will search for. And to a certain extent, the same that does translate to YouTube. But the problem is what they've done is they've changed their focus, and their platforms become less about being for everyone and more about being for a select few. That's just my idea. I don't know whether it's
even
true.
The audience, though.
Yeah, even the audience.
Not just for creators. I mean, I find myself getting bored now on YouTube because it's the same bloody stuff over and over again.
There's a lot of repetition. There's a hell of a lot of repetition.
Yeah, and this has been a problem. People have flagged this up, and we're getting off topic, but people have flagged this up.
Yeah.
With things like extreme groups. If you start looking at a particular political, viewpoint, you'll just get recommended that political viewpoint all the time.
Yeah.
So it leads people down the garden path of extremism.
Yeah.
You start watching flat earth videos, you get all sorts of other flat earth and conspiracy theories and all that other nonsense. So you get funneled down that rabbit hole.
And they do this all the time, and it annoys me. It's like, yeah, I've seen one video on this topic. It doesn't mean I want to watch another 20 with the same perspective.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like
it fails to recognise that people have wide tastes, broad tastes.
Yeah.
They don't want to see and listen and watch the same stuff over and over and over again.
But this is
because that gets boring.
This is where it falls. This is where you just using an algorithm falls down, because it can only predict based on what you've already done. That's the problem. I wonder with Stadia, because you've got you can have this integration in, like you say, jump into a stream. you got these aspects that they want to incorporate. But I'm just wondering how practically that will work, based on the fact that the existing YouTube tends to be quite one-dimensional, doesn't it? As we've just discussed, when it comes to sort of predicting what you want out of the platform.
And it's more anarchic. Even now, it's not as anarchic as it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago. But if you look at the way Google is now, it's far more varied than maybe Google would want it to be if they're trying to push people into pressing a button and going to a particular video. That suggests that they're going to have collated content.
Yeah.
Much more so than they have now.
Yeah, I think so.
And so the knock-on for YouTube is well, certainly for small guys, is well, it's gonna just make things worse. But that's we're kind of drifting off topic, but I do think it is heavily connected.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is. I mean, it is connected because they're using it as one of the platforms that Stadia is kind of like based around. So, to a certain extent, yes, it is connected. I mean, yeah, we went a little bit off topic about how YouTube is today, but the version of YouTube that we have now is going to be even different once they start doing this sort of level of integration with their own gaming platform. It's going to have to be different.
They're not going to want some random video coming up when you click a button. They're going to want a specific video coming up when you press a button. So that's gonna by its very nature create a kind of programming regime where they decide what is available.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. The future looks exciting and interesting, but also could be very bleak. Sorry, go on, Grant.
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't really have much more to add to that. I mean, it is exciting and interesting, like you say, but we have to be wary as well, because the internet that we knew from even just 10 years ago has changed to such an extent that there is a lot less, I don't know, I guess what you would call a sort of openness.
Yeah.
It's becoming more of a closed internet just by default, which kind of worries me a little bit.
Yeah, and it does me as well. And we keep being pushed towards almost, well, it's, as I say, a programmed internet, a controlled internet where big companies decide what gets seen and what gets heard. And I know there are reasons behind that to some degree, but I think people overreact sometimes, and we're being pushed into a world that's a lot less interesting if we're not careful. But anyway, look, we are going to veer heavily off topic if we're not careful. So I'm going to wrap it up there. I'm just going to ask you for your final little thoughts on pros and cons. So what would be the most exciting aspect of this that you're looking forward to? And then what would be the thing that you're really dreading?
Yeah. Pros. It's a really interesting technology. I think the way that they're trying to change the conversation on games and the way we play games is one of the most exciting aspects of it. If they can produce the kind of quality games that they're promising, so they talked about 4K 60 FPS with games like Doom. Great if they can do it, and there's not going to be factors that stop that from happening. So there's a little bit of a pros and cons sort of woven together there, but it's interesting because it's like we said, we expected a hardware streaming box, and all we got was a controller and their data center technology. So this could be a big leap forward in gaming, and my hope is that it does shake up gaming to an extent that a lot of the big players look at it and think, well, how do we respond to this? Because I think that makes the gaming environment interesting, for not just for developers but for players, for everybody. Yeah. My fear is that it won't work properly, and it won't be priced in a way that will attract enough people to it. But I don't think the pricing will be a big problem. I think it's the practicality of how it's going to work with people's internet that will be the biggest issue.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
So yeah,
I'd agree with all that. I would add, as a pro, and we touched on this in the main element of the video, but the big pro for me could be that this changes what is possible with game development.
Yeah.
And that could, again, it's always a double-edged sword. That could be a negative thing. It could be a positive thing. We've talked about episodic content and all the rest of it, but it could really change the way developers look at what they can achieve. And if that's the case, then that'll be a real positive, and we could see some really exciting new game ideas coming out of this. And so that's a real positive. That's a massive positive for me. And I don't want to get too wrapped up in that because it could all fall flat. But I really am excited about that potential that's there.
Yeah.
The downsides, well, I think you've pretty much covered those. I think you're right with pricing. I don't think there's going to be a big issue with pricing. I think the biggest problem will be delivery. And we'll have to wait and see on that. Mm-hmm. But I think that's it, really. I think we've pretty much covered it. I don't think there's much else to say at this stage. Maybe we'll come back and revisit this when it's when we have more news and maybe when it's released as well. But in the meantime, I'm going to ask you to tell people where you can be found.
I'm mostly just on Twitter these days because my channel has just been kind of wrapped up in terms of content. But yeah, I'm at Over the Edge YT on Twitter, and you can find me there mostly.
So go and look up Grant. He's usually posting on there, and you can also find him in my Twitter as well. In my Discord, I should say.
Oh yes, I'm on your Discord.
He's in my Discord, so he's usually having a chat in there with me. And as you can tell by this video, we tend to go on a bit. So if you're interested in that, come and check us out. And you know where to find me. As I said, I've mentioned the Discord, but you're on my channel, so you know where I am. And as ever, let me know, and Grant as well, let us know what you think of this in the comments. And hopefully we can hash it out some more in there. But in the meantime, I'm going to finish off my cold tea. And I'll speak to you in the next one. Bye.